one thing China does is never do today what it can do much more easily in 5 to 10 years' time. They think of the long game. And involvement with Prince Andrew dates back an entire decade. And clearly he was targeted, and it became easier after his protection support from the royal household was removed. And I think that perhaps asks some questions there about whether or not that should have actually taken place.
So let's get the thoughts of Kate McCann, our political editor at Times Radio. Hello to you, Kate.
Hi, John.
Okay, you've been following this then in Parliament, and you obviously well across what's been going on in the High Court earlier on. What are your reflections on this story so far, Kate?
Well, in terms of the political fallout, John, I mean, I think this is going to be a story that is going to be a thorn in the side of the Labour government. And that's largely because now MPs who are deeply concerned about China, and they're currently speaking in the House of Commons as an urgent question going on, as we know, they're really focusing in on this foreign influence registration scheme. Now, it's something that the previous government set up. It was supported by Labour at the time. And there's been a question mark over whether or not this new government is going to implement it speedily. Essentially, it's saying that if you come to live and work in this country, if you are sponsored in any way or you're working in any way for another country, you have to declare your own activities. It's kind of strange that doesn't happen at the moment if you think about it, but it doesn't. And there is an enhanced tier for some countries which the UK government deems particularly risky. There's a bit of a battle on now to ensure that China is on that enhanced tier. It's come up a couple of times in the House of Commons in the last half an hour, and the government is so far staying tight-lipped on whether or not that will happen. If we take a step back and think about this case more broadly, though, I mean, this alleged Chinese spy today has made the decision through his own legal team to allow his name to be published in the press. It was after the pressure on him and that team from MPs in the Commons who would use parliamentary privilege to name him. He's come out and said in a statement this afternoon that he's done nothing wrong. And actually, it's the political environment that's changed around him. He said, when the political environment is good, you want me to come and help and ensure there's investment from China. When it's negative, suddenly I'm the bad guy and you want me called a spy. And he's maintaining his innocence in this case.
So we heard Dan Jarvis there, Kate, saying that the government was on the case in getting this new register of people, potentially people of influence, working for a foreign power, getting it up and running. And the government also said that the last government was slow to do that. Is there validity in that argument?
There is. Suella Braverman, who was the former Home Secretary, has actually just in the last few minutes stood up in the Commons and challenged Dan Jarvis, who's the Home Office Minister, about this particular issue. She said, look, why are you dragging your feet? This scheme was ready to go. When you came into government, you could have pressed go on day one, put China on the enhanced list, and we wouldn't really be having this problem. Dan Jarvis stood up and said, you know, I wasn't going to talk about this, but the previous government dragged its own feet. And that's because there was a bit of a row inside cabinet about whether or not China should go on this list. The same row is now reportedly happening in the current Labour government. And you can see the logical reason for that. There will be some departments who think that by designating China in this way, it makes it a sort of hostile environment, if you like. It makes it more difficult for businesses, makes it more difficult actually politically. We know that Rachel Reeves is heading over to Beijing in the new year to make closer ties with her own economic partners on the Chinese side. To designate them in this way would make things politically more difficult. There are, though, John, those who say, well, look, if the business environment is good, it doesn't matter whether China's on a list or not. China wants to invest in the UK. It'll do that anyway. We really shouldn't overthink this.
And meanwhile, Kate, Prince Andrew is, you know, for obvious reasons, very much at the centre of this story. The man accused of being a Chinese spy had particular close access to the Duke of York, didn't he?
Yeah, he was part of something called Pitch Up Palace, which was a bit like a Dragon's Den style enterprise scheme where people could go in and make their pitch, a business environment, if you like. And this alleged Chinese spy set up the Chinese arm of Pitch Up Palace. He was very close to Prince Andrew over quite a long period of time. I think, in fact, went to one of Prince Andrew's birthday parties, a private celebration, quite a small number of people invited to that. So you can see that there were extensive links and there were close ties between the men. I think the difficulty here is that when it extends out beyond Prince Andrew and into the political realm, both Theresa May and David Cameron have been pictured with this alleged spy. Both of them, former prime ministers, say say they met thousands of people during their time in office and they don't remember meeting this individual. Others, including George Osborne and former chairman of the Conservative Party and a number of other MPs, have also said to have met this person over the many years that he's been active in business politics and beyond. I think the question now is, how do you differentiate between people who do legitimately come here to do business deals and therefore do meet all of these politicians at summits and work with people like Prince Andrew, and how do you separate out those who are acting against the UK state and for states like China? That's where these kinds of schemes, this influence list, come in. That's why they're important. But there is also, I think, a bigger question about how we disentangle those things when they are so tightly wound into areas like universities and business across the UK.
Kay McCann, good to talk to you. Let's talk a bit later on. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, is taking a news conference a bit later on, in maybe about 20 minutes or so, depending on whether it sticks to time, and we'll be carrying and covering that for you here on Drive. Now, let's welcome to the programme Tobias Ellwood, who is the former chair of the Defence Select Committee at Westminster. Welcome, Tobias.
Good evening.
What are your thoughts at this moment?
It shines a light on perhaps the difficulties we have with China. China is not going away. And the challenge is far more nuanced than simply saying China is bad and we can pack them into a corner. But for far too long, China has gone unchallenged across a wide spectrum of issues. In fact, its military expansion in the South China Sea, the restrictions it imposes on foreign businesses working in China, the scale of intellectual property theft as well, the use of subsidies, and of course what it does in the area of coercion, of stealing intellectual property, of also what it does in leveraging influence, particularly with vulnerable people. And that's exactly why I think Prince Andrew was targeted. The question, therefore, is how do you then manage China in the future? And to what scale has that infiltration already taken place in and across British society?
So was it then, Tobias, was it just too easy for Yang Tengbo to get close to high-ranking figures in British politics and society, such as Prince Andrew, such as David Cameron and Theresa May?
Well, I think there are different timescales there. What one thing China does is never do today what it can do much more easily in 5 to 10 years' time. They think of the long game. And involvement with Prince Andrew dates back an entire decade. And clearly he was targeted, and it became easier after his protection support from the royal household was removed. And I think that perhaps asks some questions there about whether or not that should have actually taken place. This wider question I go back to is what China is now up to today. It's an economic powerhouse. I've already sort of said that. In our lifetimes, it will challenge America's dominance economically, technologically, and militarily. And China is now on a declared long-term mission to leverage influence from the West and alter how global order operates. And one way that it does this is becoming more assertive, more aggressive, and what we in the military would call gray zone warfare, exploiting our openness and stealing those secrets and exerting influence in this way.
Yes.
Where is the off-ramp here? Where can we actually find ourselves in a place where we can both agree? We mustn't forget that actually China is the UK's fourth largest trading partner. So, the commercial interests out there, businesses need clarity as to what our China strategy is. Likewise, academia as well, another area where China seeks to influence, as well as in political and diplomatic circles.
Yes. So look, even if there were to be, and we're told there will be, some sort of register of people exercising influence on behalf of China, being on that register, will that exclude them from access to high-ranking people in this country? Because, as you say, China is a key investor. China is a key market for British exports, a big part of the British economic picture. So, I mean, can these people be excluded once they are named, once they are on such a register?
Yes, I expect that is where this is going. It's making it much more transparent as to who we're dealing with, the foreign influence registration scheme, and then working out where China fits into that. I will stress, though, that what they're doing here, they're also doing in America. They're also doing across Europe as well. And if we want to stand up to China, as I say, as it exploits a different interpretation of our global order, we cannot do this alone. We cannot stand up to China, given how big they have become over the last couple of decades. I mean, the fault line actually goes back, in my view, to 2011, when we allowed them to join the World Trade Organization on China's terms. It was given so much latitude. It's allowed its economy to expand. It's now entwined and enroped so many countries through its One Belt, One Road program. It's become enormously powerful, doing things in its own way. If we are to stand up to China, then we need a concerted effort, a collective effort by the West. And I'm afraid, I go back to my very first point, there's an absence of China strategy. You cannot simply say China is bad and then hope things were going to go away.
Right, yeah.
Those days have gone.
But clearly, this country, like other countries, needs to put up its guard against espionage, whether it's conventional espionage, whether it's industrial espionage. But when it comes to those relationships between people of influence in the business world from China who are, almost invariably connected to the government, which means to the Chinese Communist Party, what should change?
Well, this is where the vetting comes in, understanding who you're allowing access to, and simply being more vigilant. Because, as I say, there is an attitudinal change which has moved forward. The one thing you can say about Donald Trump in his last 4 years is waking up as to what China actually wants to do. And when I say China, I say Beijing, I say the communist leadership there, rather than the Chinese people as a whole. But that is where our world is going, this gray zone warfare. This ability to coerce and infiltrate our society, to cause economic harm, to cause political discord. This is what China and indeed Russia does very, very well indeed. And we're only just waking up to it.
And therefore, you argue, just still far too vulnerable. Tobias Ellwood, thank you.